Are you looking to grow revenues, increase profitability, or obtain financing? If so, you came to the right place.
Running a business is all about leadership. How do you become a better leader? Learn from the successful entrepreneurs and business owners how to lead your organization more effectively. That's why we created Leadership Live at 8:05, Talking Small Business, to help you succeed with your host, Andrew Frazier, Business Growth Pro and CFO and founder of the Small Business Pro University. Every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, we're joined by experienced entrepreneurs and business owners who share their secrets to success via live stream. Also, every Friday morning, we release a new podcast episode. Either way, you will learn about developing your business leadership skills from our roster of highly performing guest experts. Leadership Live is one of the many valuable resources provided through the Small Business Pro University, empowering business owners to learn, profit, and grow. Find out more at sbprou.com.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Leadership Live at 8:05, Talking Small Business. I'm your host, Andrew Frazier, and excited to be hanging out with you one more Tuesday evening. As you know, we have some great guests, and we talk about valuable topics for entrepreneurs and small business owners. At the end of the day, your business can only go as far as you are prepared to lead it. So it's key to have, business knowledge as well as develop your leadership skills so that you can take your business to the next level and beyond. So that's why we're here. That's what Leadership Live at 8:05 is all about. And we're just going to hang out, chat, and talk about small business and key things that can be beneficial to you. Also, thanks for tuning in. Please don't hesitate to put something in the chat. If you have any questions, you're welcome to put those there too, and we'll try and get to them. So let's get started. So tonight, my guest is Richard Parker, and we're going to talk about really buying and selling businesses and how to do that successfully. And, Richard knows a lot about that because he's bought and sold more than 10 businesses. So definitely, he's seen a lot, but not only that, he teaches people about it and has written one of the leading books about it. So I'm excited to have him on the show tonight. Look forward to chatting with him, and let me just bring him on. Say hello. Hey, Richard, welcome.
Well, thank you. Nice to see you and happy to be here.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to share some of your expertise. We have a great audience here, always hungry for knowledge, and having someone like you to share yours is tremendous. So, hey, good evening, Darren. So, excellent. So, you got your Chicago shirt out there. Does that mean
No,
you're Chicago?
I got my Montreal Canadiens shirt, and I was going to tell you, I must really like you because the Montreal Canadiens are playing tonight. It's starting the second period shortly, and there are very few people on the planet that I would interrupt me watching a hockey game to talk to. I'm talking personal business, whatever. I mean, it takes a lot. You got to pry me away from there, like with the jaws of life. So I'm actually very happy to be here, and that's testimony to how excited I am to be here. There's the Montreal Canadiens. I grew up in Montreal, and big hockey fan. Still play hockey at this old age, and that's my gig.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you again for joining us, even though it's a little bit of a challenging evening. But we'll make sure it's a lot of fun.
I know it will be,
and well worth it. So that's cool. So I could introduce you, but I don't think I would do justice. So if you could take a few minutes and talk a little bit about your journey, sort of how you got to where you are, some of the key milestones, and then we'll get into some Q&A and talking small business. So
perfect. So it's hopefully I won't bore your listeners too badly. I grew up in Montreal, and I live in South Florida now. I lived here for the last 28 years. I grew up in a very lower middle class neighborhood, great neighborhood, fun place to grow up, and spent most of my time outside. Summers playing baseball, and winters, of course, you can't be a Canadian without playing a lot of hockey. And I started working. I didn't go to university. I started working at a couple different companies, then started working for a consumer products company in Canada, which was growing exponentially, and found myself moving up the ladder rapidly, mostly from a standpoint that we couldn't hire people fast enough. I was probably way over my head, but it was a great learning experience. And I ended up running one of their divisions. I was 29 years old. You had a large company. The company was doing $60 million. I was running a division that was doing about 5 or 6 million. This goes back to 1990. So it's, and in Canada. So it's, you multiply by 10 if you want to equate it to the US. And then when I was 29 years old, I did a real stupid thing. I invested quite a bit of money in the stock market, bought stock on margin. Someone told me how to do that and said, well, when you sell this, when the stock goes up and you sell it, you really only have to put in half the money and you cash in the rest. Well, that sounds great until you realize if the stock goes down. And I ended up blowing $60,000, which was pretty much close to everything that I had at that point. And I realized that the only way I was going to get out of that mess was I had to put myself in a position where I didn't have any limits on my income. And the only ways to really do that professionally was I figured I'd either start a business or buy a business, and spending very little time thinking about it because I really had to make a decision quickly. Realized that buying a business would really get me out of the gate quicker. So what I did is I started something very small just to get the business going, if you will. And then I quickly, within a couple of months, made an acquisition of a competitor. And it was in consumer products. I was representing manufacturers. So as a manufacturer's rep selling to retailers. And business grew well in a short period of time. And I started buying some additional companies that fit in with those, with the products or services that I was offering to various clients. And these were all additional service that I could sell to the same group of people. And started down that path. The businesses were all doing okay, making money. The one habit that I got into pretty quickly, even though I acquired probably 5 or 6 companies in the first 4 or 5 years, was I never took money out of the additional company. I was living on the first company, so it allowed me to keep plowing money back into the business to grow all the other businesses, not taking out any money. And then I got lucky enough that I acquired the rights for Eastern Canada for Sega Video. And that was it was dumb luck, really. It was nothing to do with me. It was just absolute, timing. And a colleague of mine, a good buddy, became the CEO of that company. And I acquired the Eastern Canadian rights, and my business went from $2.5 million to $30 million in a year. And that was pretty crazy. And ultimately ended up selling the businesses. And my kids were young at that point. I was considering moving to Toronto. I was thinking about maybe Burlington, Vermont, and then decided, I had enough of the winter and I was going to move to Florida, which I did. My 3 young children at the time, now 4 kids, 1 grandchild. And when I got down here, I started looking at potential acquisitions. I was involved in one venture for a couple of years. And then I was looking at acquisitions, and I was very close to pulling the trigger on one. I was immersed in the due diligence of the business, and it was really a mess. There was various companies that this company owned, and there was a lot of commingling, nothing illegal or fraudulent, but there were employees were working for one. If the company was short of cash, they were paying them from one company, they were working for another. Parts and services was sort of all over the place. And they had a lot of inventory. It was the Southeastern distributor for Maytag commercial washers and dryers, selling to dormitories and condominiums and also residents, and doing repair. And so I decided I couldn't figure out the business financially or otherwise, and I decided to walk away from the deal. And I recognized at that point, I remember standing outside the company and saying, geez, I know that the average person would have ended up going through that transaction, because it was only, not that I'm that smart, I've just been doing this a long time. And I was able to identify where the problems were. And that started me down the path. I got very intrigued of what the average person does who's looking to buy a business, but doesn't have the resources or certainly the experience or expertise that I had brought to the table, or anyone brings to the table, if you don't have the experience doing something like that. And so what did they do? And I spent a year researching the market and speaking to hundreds of business owners, business buyers, buyers who failed, buyers who succeeded, accountants, attorneys, business brokers, and recognized that there was really no good resources for people. And that led me down the path of writing the course to teach people how to buy businesses. But one thing that I discovered during my research was people needed hand-holding. And so really formatted in the way of teach people what they need to know, teach them what they need to do and how to do it, and provide them with support the whole way, advice and consulting services to help them along the way. And in addition to that, I started doing a lot of buy side and sell side representation over the years, representing businesses, representing buyers. And then in 2017, I left the M&A world somewhat on my own, and I got involved with the Dalio family office. I was hired by Ray Dalio to mentor one of his sons to teach him the art of buying businesses. And we set up our own company. Ray was our only investor, and we made a number of investments. And then, unfortunately, in December 17, 2020, my cherished friend and trusted partner, Devin Dalio, was killed in a car accident. And so we wound down the business, kept our investments. And that got me, somewhat, again, involved in the M&A world to a certain extent, but never got away from helping buyers, and decided, a couple of years ago, that at this stage in my life, I'm not operating with a financial gun to my head, thank goodness, and really want to spread the word as much as possible to help individuals looking to acquire businesses, and of course, sellers who want to exit. So that's my long, boring story, and I hope you're still awake.
Excellent. So no, that's great. Thanks for sharing. Definitely the stock market can be good and bad, as you noticed.
Yeah.
I learned the same things in the real estate. So,
right.
Definitely, they say there's risk in investments because there is risk. But
there's greater risk when you don't know what the heck you're doing, right? So that's for me, anyways. That was the that was the bonehead move. We're really not getting well informed enough about what I was getting into. So it's a good lesson, expensive lesson, but it has served me very well.
Yes. So, definitely a lot of times you grow and move forward more from your losses and failures than from your successes.
Correct.
So, but that doesn't mean too much at the time, because I'm
sure. Yeah, that's right. But if I think as you get older,
mm-hmm.
At the time it does happen, you recognize, having the benefit of experience, that you can turn this whatever this is at that moment in time into good learning. And if there's a lot of different quotes and examples. But ultimately it's how you deal with the defeat, because if you come out from the other side a little more knowledgeable, and it's okay to make mistakes, you just don't want to make them twice, and you try to avoid the big ones. But the learning that you take from it and being able to recognize it, that's ultimately, I think it just gets easier as you get older. You tend to make fewer mistakes just based on good learning, and I think you process it a little better. At least I do, and I think most people do as well.
Yeah, definitely. In undergrad I went to MIT, so everybody said it's a great place to be from, but not at. So, so they deserve that.
Very good.
So, definitely. So, we're going to be talking about buying and selling business. You have a lot of experience in that. Actually, I think I had mentioned that, before I started what I'm doing now, my goal was to buy a business. And over the first 2 years, I was doing coaching and consulting in the interim of trying to buy 2 businesses,
right.
But it can be very elusive for a number of reasons. And, you've been able to buy multiple businesses, but how many businesses did you look at buying that you didn't buy?
A lot more than the other metric. I've bought 14 businesses, including one co-investment, and I would say conservatively 10 times that of how many I looked at, maybe 20. But so, easily 10 times, easily. When I wrote the material way back, and it's obviously constantly updated, at that point in time, I had looked at over 100 companies. And there's been at least 100 since. So it's probably close to 200.
Okay. So, and that lines up with a lot of the data. It's extremely difficult to sell a business.
Yep.
And it's also extremely difficult to buy a business. And really, there's just a lot of things that have to come together to make it all the way to the end. So, one thing that you mentioned was, a lot of your businesses were similar or had similar customer bases. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah,
Um,
correct.
Talk about why and what that means and what that does for you in terms of buying a business.
Okay, well, a couple of them were outside of that domain, and they failed. Not so much the customer base, but the business wasn't right for me, and we can get into that subject matter afterwards. But what I realized early on when running my first company was a couple things. One, I mentioned that recognized that it's growth through acquisition was going to be a lot easier than organic growth. That was the first thing. And the second thing was I read a book in, oh my God, in the 1980s, I think it was, by Tom Peters called the Thriving on Chaos. Terrific book. It's still timeless, so I urge people to take a look at it. But I remember reading a stat in there that people are about 60% more inclined to do business, to buy again from people that they're already doing business with versus buying from someone new, even if their experience wasn't fantastic with that person. Yet, if you could imagine, in my mind, well, if you have a good experience with that, you're going to even be more inclined. And so when I started looking to acquire businesses, my whole thesis in my very unsophisticated way was, hey, I've got all these customer base. I take real good care of my customers. I know we have a good relationship. I have to figure out how I can get more products or services that I can sell to the same group of customers. It was like I just have to stuff more things into the pipeline. And it just seemed so logical to me, and it made a whole lot of sense. Now, a lot of those businesses were ancillary business. I was selling products to retailers, mostly in consumer goods. A lot of them were children's related products, pacifier, squeeze toys, bibs, general toys, some Halloween product, and then started a retail servicing business that would merchandise the products that were in the store. But again, I was calling on the same buyers and servicing the same products. So when I speak with business owners, because very often they're looking to sell and they're not ready to sell, and they're talking about growth, and I'm sure you go through this all the time with your clients, is I just think the path to growth is so much easier if you have a customer base already in place. Just figure out how you're going to find more stuff to stuff into the pipeline.
No, that was a great insight, and actually, one thing I talk to a lot of business owners about is focus. And a lot of times, you have a business and you're like, I'm going to sell to these people and these people and these people and these people. But every time you have a different target market, that's a totally different business.
Correct.
And you need a separate business plan and everything if you're going to do it right. And basically, instead of buying businesses, you're just adding to your business.
Correct.
Which is a great way to do it. You're sort of rolling up the businesses more or less. A lot of times if you're looking to buy a business, but how do you find a business? You're like, I want to buy a business. Where do you look? How do you find a business that you want? Because that was one of the challenges that I had when I was looking as well.
So one of the things, and you make a very important point, especially to anybody who's thinking about buying a business, the statistics in the industry are awful. Over 90% of the people who begin the search to buy a business never complete a transaction. You live that as well. And what I've seen repeatedly, not with our clients, I'm happy to report, but what I've seen repeatedly, there's a reason for that data. Because what happens is when people go into the process of looking to consider buying a business, by and large, they've never done it before. And so they lack the knowledge. which is understandable because you can acquire the knowledge, but they don't take enough of a step back and to think about how to go about doing this in a good way. And the tendency is to jump right in. In other words, with the availability of publicly listed businesses for sale, when I say publicly listed, on databases, not publicly traded companies, but the databases of publicly of businesses that are available on the public markets for sale, they jump right in. They start looking at one business after another, trying to figure out which, if any, is right for them. And they're all over the place. And then they start coming across situations where, how are they going to finance this deal? Then they start getting into the negotiations, or have to come up with valuations. There's other buyers and there's pressures, and good businesses sell quickly. And so they get immersed, they get right into the weeds, but they're not prepared to be in the weeds, and they get overwhelmed. And in no time, they just realize that they're just not prepared to navigate this road successfully. And so they drop out. And the numbers I've mentioned are over 90% don't succeed. And the average person spends 18 months looking and they never buy. And so the first thing you have to do is take a step back and approach this in a meaningful way, which is, in my view, first of all, if you don't have any, if you're trying to embark on a project that you've never done before, you have to get to a certain level of expertise. So the acquisition of knowledge is critically important. And I've always believed that if you want to do something that you've never done before, well, just find someone who's already done it successfully and copy them, or learn how they do it, or get them to mentor you, or whatever the case may be, but learn from them because they've already proven successful at it. And then the second piece to this is, with respective business buyers, is you've got to figure out first what type of business is right for you. When I say what type of business is right for you, that marries perfectly with your skill set. Because if you have a good business and it's run by the wrong person, it's going to go bankrupt. It's going to go bankrupt pretty quickly. And so you have to get really in tune with your skills of what is your greatest skill set, and make sure that that is the driving factor, the revenue and profits of any business you consider purchasing. So when you marry those two, and then if you go into this process, as opposed to the people who dive right in and start looking at all these databases of businesses for sale, and this sort of like spinning in circles, versus you take a step back and you have a roadmap and a knowledge base upon which you can build and operate and go through the process. If you have that, and also you get in tune with what type of business is right for you, then you attack the process in a very good way. Then finding and buying it is actually not that difficult.
Okay. So no, definitely, makes sense to, there's so much to learn. I'd spent some time in M&A on a corporate level, but that's a lot different.
Yes.
But I was looking to buy multi-unit franchises.
Okay.
So that, I could have a nice base. And I actually had a consultant I was working with who did that. And, we got, several deals. We made several offers. But, one of the challenges is, when you get to look at the nuts and bolts, a lot of times things fall apart.
Yep.
For one reason or another.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about, even if you find a business, what are some of the things that can make your deal fall apart, or what do you need to look at, first cut, before you even spend too much time with it?
Okay, it's a great question. So the first thing what comes to mind for everybody is, well, I've got to spend a whole lot of time on the financials. The good thing is the financials, it's math. I mean, they are or they aren't, and it's binary. So looking it through with the financials to make sure that they make sense to you, and very often it's unbelievable, because the industry stats are that 50% of this in the small business world, like Main Street USA, 50% of the deals fall apart in due diligence, and a lot of that has to do with the financials, because what is initially represented may not hold true. But you want to get through with the financials. They are or they aren't, and it's the easiest part of the business to prove or disprove. And so you spend some time doing that. What I like to look at is a couple of things when looking at the business. Number one, are there any obvious glaring problems, such as customer concentration, or an industry which doesn't seem to be growing, or competition that can easily put you out of business, or key employees that must stay after the owner leaves. And then you really defeat the purpose of going into business, because then you're reliant on someone else again, as opposed to controlling your own destiny. Is the owner the business? Very often in small businesses, the only asset they have is between the ears of the owner, and they leave every day at 5 o'clock. And so can you can you replace the owner? Because most in the small business world, like the franchises that you were looking at, there's a component of owner operator that you were going to have to take over. So what are the key potential problems in that business, and can you solve for them? And so whether it be customer concentration or things we've talked about, or if you're looking for your example, multi-unit franchises, whatever they may be, is there a threat that the franchisor can come in and open up very close to your territory and infringe upon your business, actually cannibalize it? Are there licenses or anything required in operating the business that you're not geared to do? Can you take over that business? Can you learn the business? Is it simple enough for you to learn, or is it too complicated? Because you want to be able to have a period of transition with the seller, but be able to really learn that business in short order so that the seller can get out and you can, you're the new sheriff in town, so you could start running your business. So I like to look at the beginning at the high level problems of what become glaringly obvious. If it's an industry that I like, if the financials make sense, and if there's any customer concentration or any clear red flags. Is the business growing? Is it declining? What does the future look like with me as the owner? Are there opportunities to grow this business? And then as you go down the path and start getting through the various stages of the buying process and getting into the negotiations or the valuations or what have you, all of those can be manageable because you break those down into bite-sized pieces once you've gone through these high-level issues of what can be problematic.
Okay. So, you mentioned that, the financials are just math. But, definitely some business owners sort of do the new math.
They do the fuzzy math. Absolutely. But, but ultimately, and that is true. And it's less and less as more business using computer and POS systems, what have you. So it's certainly been reduced dramatically. But yes, can they cook the books? Of course they can cook the books. But the reality is, because it's math, you can figure that out. And if you're not capable of doing it, then you can bring in a CPA who's capable of doing it. So knowing how to read financial statements is quite important. But it's not that difficult because they all generally follow a similar format. But yes, is it possible that they can do it? Of course they can. But the flip side of that is, because it's math, it has to add up. And if it doesn't add up, then it's just not working, because one plus one is always going to equal 2. It doesn't equal 4.
Right. So no, definitely that's key. Have you run into? I know a lot of people run into, the owner saying, "Oh well, my taxes only say we made this much, but
Yep.
we really made this much." How do you address that, and what are your thoughts on people who do that?
Well, when it comes to unreported income, I have a couple of different thoughts. The first thing is, I don't believe in it running a business. I think you should report all your income. It makes your business better. You're not looking over your shoulder, and more than anything else, it's illegal. So you don't want to be busy worrying that the IRS is going to come in and knock on your door. And plus, if you put everything through the business, you're going to grow the business, because businesses sell at a multiple. So every dollar that you grow the businesses will trade from 3 to 5 times whatever in the lower market. So every dollar of value that you add, you'll get 3 out at the end. So ultimately, you're going to make a lot more money by keeping the money in the business. So that's philosophically the way I approach it. Now, when it comes to a prospective business buyer who's looking at a business and the seller says, "Yeah, well, we made X amount of dollars, but wink, wink, we really make X, Y, and Z, and what have you." Well, the golden rule to all of this is very simple. If the seller cannot prove it, you cannot pay for it. End of story. If you pay for it and they haven't been able to prove it, well, shame on you. If you get sucked into doing that and you end up taking a big hit as a result, it's one of those, don't say I didn't warn you, because if they cannot prove it, you cannot pay for it. Alternately, the way I approach it with sellers who tell me that and say, "Okay, well, there's $100,000 extra." You say that's unreported income. Keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean they're putting that in their pocket, because who knows what they're doing with their money? Are they paying any of the employees with some of that cash? Are they buying any supplies with part of that cash? Are they paying part of the rent with any of that cash? Who knows what that $100,000 may actually not net out to $100,000. So my approach always, over and above saying, if you can't prove it, I'm not paying for it, is I'll tell you what we'll do. Since Mr. or Mrs. Seller, since it's not provable, I will buy the business, not factoring in that cash portion. And at the end of the first year, let's meet again. And let's say I buy your business at a 4 times multiple. and you say it's $100,000 extra that I would put in my pocket, that's 400 grand. So I'll run the business for a year. And at the end of the year, you and I will sit down and I'll tell you how much money I put in my pocket, and we'll multiply that by 4 and I'll pay you that amount. And the seller will say, well, how do I know that number's real? And I say, exactly, that's my point. I don't know that your number's real, so there's no way I'm paying for it. So that's my stance on it. It's pretty stern, but it's just basic common sense.
Okay. No, it makes sense. Makes sense. And if you're not reporting it, you're sort of cheating the government. So
you can't steal it twice.
Yeah. So definitely, you want to be careful of that. Definitely on the other side, but in a similar way, I'm sure you've had people say, "Oh, well, we're doing this year, but next year we're going to do this."
So congratulations
to do that. How do you approach that? And is that a pretty similar way?
Well, the first thing is one of the 10 commandments that I teach related to buying a business is you pay for the past, you consider the present, but you buy it for the future. The price you pay for the business is based on the historical financials of the business, because that's what's being delivered to you when you acquire the business. If something happens in the future that grows the business, well, that's generally a result of the work that you as the new owner do. However, there are cases where a seller may be putting something into place, gets a new client that's going to be a significant client that's only going to be realized after the closing. Or they say, well, we had one up year, one down year. Next year looks to be really good. We can't really, we want to sell it based on the best year, whatever. So you put together what are performance-based transactions or earnouts based on, you come up with a formula saying if the following happens, for example, business is going to be sold for $1 million and it was making $250,000 and he's selling it for $1 million, so 4 times multiple. And the seller says, well, really, we got this one large client and that number is going to move up by about $100,000 next year. So, well, okay, if they already have that in place, and if that is materialized, then we'll pay extra for the business. But I'm not paying you that in advance. I don't buy promises. Now, I recognize the fact that you have put that into place, and there should be something realized for that if it actually does materialize, but you haven't yet earned it. Now, so that is going to be carved out and be called an earnout. There's also performance-based transactions, which are similar to earnouts, where if certain metrics are hit, then the price gets adjusted in the future based on those metrics. And what we're seeing a lot of, because there's been a couple of up and down years in a lot of businesses, it's hard to get a real good fix on what is the actual sustainable level of revenue and profits. So we're seeing, I'm guiding a lot of my clients in doing a lot more performance-based deals, earnout deals, which take these exact things into consideration, and you put those into the deal so that you stick to that commandment and it's commandment number 1 of my 10 commandments, which is pay for the past, consider present, but buy it for the future. And you, if it materializes in the future, you will in fact pay for it, but the price that you're agreeing upon for the business is based on historical financials, and you can't waver from that.
Great point. Great point. So now, the $10 million question is, how do you figure out how much a business is worth? I think that breeds a lot of disagreement. Most sellers probably think their business is worth more than it's worth, versus buyers want to pay less than it's worth.
Yep.
And, figuring out a happy medium is key. So what are some rules of thumb to think about when you're considering the value of the business?
Well, I'm going to call them guardrails as opposed to rules of thumb, because I call, rules of thumb, I always say, and no disrespect here, I always say rules of thumb are dumb because you can't compare two businesses, but just general rules and guidelines, right? So you brought up a very good point with talking about the conflicting values. One of the things for sure and for certain that I've learned after doing this for 34 years is what a seller thinks the business is worth, it rarely has anything to do with the value. The other point is you were asking about how sellers come up with the price. And if they don't have professional input, what they typically do is they put on blindfolds and they throw a bunch of darts and wherever it lands, that's what they figure their price is. Or they say, here's how much I need to retire, or here's how much blood, sweat, and tears that I put into this, and here's what I need. And that's not quantifiable. And so from a buyer's perspective, a buyer has to completely disregard the asking price, pay no attention to it whatsoever. If you ever want to revisit it from a standpoint of how is the seller thinking about this thing, that's okay. But you pay no attention to the asking price. A valuation, I just did a webinar on this exact specific topic, and a valuation has to be defensible. It has to take in all the key fundamentals of the business, and there's over 50 of them. And what you typically do is you have to narrow down the number of what they call seller's discretionary earnings or adjusted EBITDA, but you're attaching a multiple to that number. And that alone will probably give us, we probably have 5 shows at 8:05 to talk about how that, the formulas for that. But in from a 30,000 foot view is that the number that a business, the new buyer will have to pay themselves a salary and pay off any debt and grow the business. That's the number that you're going to be multiplying, which is based upon the seller's, the pre-tax income of the business plus the seller's perks plus any other additional add backs. It's called owner benefits, seller discretionary earnings, or adjusted earnings. That's a number, and it's got a formula. To that number, you attach a multiple. Now, the question is, what multiple? Well, it's got to fit into certain parameters, which is return on your investment. Because at the one hand, you can take your money, you can put it into a certificate of deposit, or on the other hand, you can go and put it on number 17 black in Las Vegas and get 35-1 odds. Somewhere in the middle, it's got to make sense. And so I like to believe that if you took the money and put it into the stock market, average returns about 11%. And so you've got to be somewhere between that 11 and 35. And what you should be able to achieve is a 25 to 30%, 33% return on your cash investment. And when you do that multiple, when you do that with that in mind, is the multiples are going to fall within certain parameters. Now, valuations are considered an art versus a science. I like to reduce as much as I can to the scientific part, which we have a valuation formula that's stress tested on over 1,000 transactions that automates this whole process. But again, it's got to be within certain parameters. And generally speaking, when you talk about businesses that are throwing off this, and these are some very loosey-goosey rules, but gives you a little bit of parameters. Businesses that are, that owner benefit number, seller's discretionary earnings of $500,000 or less will usually fit in a 1 to 3 times multiple. One being, a business that's highly reliant on the seller or a doctor's office or something is, business services that rely totally on the individual still trade on the much lower part because there's no guarantee that the customers will follow. And then the other, then they start trading higher and higher, 3 times. When it gets to over $500,000 to $1 million, it can go into the 4 times neighborhood, and above that, it's usually on the high side is about a 5 times multiple. But it's not complicated to do, but you have to know what you're doing. And so we've tried to automate a lot of it. And again, it's just to have some general parameters. You have to weigh in the fundamentals of the business, make sure you're multiplying the right number and having a proper return on your investment compared to other investments that you can potentially make.
Okay. All right. No, that's great. I liked your answer to the seller's value of disregarding it. Because, this like real, personally, on the personal side, there's like guarantees and there's rules. On the business side, there's no rules. So it's always
no rules.
Buyer beware.
Yeah, there's buyer beware, and they've got a lot more emotion attached to it. They put in all this time. It's their legacy. I get all that, but it still has to make sense from the buyer's perspective. So that's why the buyers need to put together valuations that are defensible, because very often a seller can get insulted, but once they understand that they've got nothing quantifiable, they just pick the number out of the air, close their eyes and threw darts, or something along those lines. They recognize that what they think it's worth is it doesn't equate to the value.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that, because a lot of times you figure, oh, well, I'll get 20% off what they asked, and that's a good price. But many times businesses are for sale for like 4 times what they're worth or more.
Absolutely. So, that's a great point. Yeah, there's the discount doesn't matter if you're discounting off the wrong number, right? That's why you as the buyer have to formulate your own valuation. And for me, it's don't allow yourself to get polluted or influenced by what the seller thinks their business is worth.
Definitely. And it goes back to, I don't know if you're a Warren Buffett fan, but
Who isn't?
Many years ago, he always has his annual report and annual meeting, but he said something, a quote that was always caught my eye. He said, you know, if you're playing poker and you don't know who the patsy is, it's you. So, you know, if you don't know you're getting a good deal,
That's great. Yeah,
take advantage of. So
that's right. That's great. That's really great.
so yeah. So I mean, that definitely a key thing. So now, business brokers.
Yep.
You know, what are your thoughts on them? You know, are they positive or negative? What should you be careful if someone's trying to sell you a business through a business broker?
So I do intermediary work. So if I say anything disparaging, I'm taking a shot at my own community, because I do brokerage. I mean, with the deal size that I do, they call it investment banking, but it's actually just a fancy word for business broker. So business brokers, people should understand whether the buyer or the sell side, and especially, you know, business brokers don't necessarily work like real estate agents, where they share listings and what have you. So oftentimes, and more oftentimes, there could be just one broker in the deal. And buyers, from a buyer's perspective, you need to understand that the business broker's agenda is to sell the business. They get paid on commission. They don't eat if they don't sell businesses. Are there some good brokers? Of course there are. Are there a lot of bad brokers? Absolutely. There's a lot more bad ones than good ones. And that happens anytime you're in a commission-only industry. A business broker, their agenda is to sell a business. It's not necessarily to sell you the right business. And they're not all like this, but there's a disproportionate amount that are. They have to sell a business to eat. And so as a buyer, the most important thing to look at is understanding that the business broker who's representing the seller, number one, they're not going to be dispensing unbiased advice to you. That's number one. Number two, they have done this before. And so they know how to get the deal to the finish line, and documentation and other pieces to the deal that are required. So they have some value there. And the third piece, which I think is really, really important, is they can act as a buffer between the buyer and seller. The buyer needs the seller for training. And you also want to have a really nice relationship with the seller, if at all possible, throughout the transaction. It just makes everything more doable, more meaningful, and easier. So if at all possible, you want to have a good relationship, and bad news has to be delivered periodically. And so let the broker deliver the bad news. That's from a buyer's perspective. From a seller's perspective, while there are all some downsides to some brokers, and they don't do much, and they just overprice businesses just to get them listed and throw them up and sort of spray and pray with their marketing. On the other hand, of all the businesses sold, I think I've used a broker outside of one deal. I've always used a business broker, and I'm allegedly supposed to know what I'm doing in all of this, because the important thing from a seller's perspective, as long as you get a good broker, is while your business is for sale, you have to keep running your business. You can't take your eyes off running your business. So you want to have a third party in the middle to handle all the inquiries that come in, to make sure the NDAs are signed, that the buyers are being qualified properly, the information is being given to them, and that the broker learns enough about your business that they can answer 90% of the question before you're potentially even meeting with some of the buyers. Because if not, your business is not guaranteed to sell, and you don't want to be spending your whole time dealing with buyers and inquirers if the business doesn't sell, because guaranteed at the end of a year your business will have declined as a result, because you've taken your eyes off the prize. So I think in summary, if you're talking about buyers and buyers, sellers, and brokers, they're part of the equation. You could use them effectively, and the optimal word being use them effectively. They have their role as in the eyes of a buyer, and they have their roles in the eyes of a seller. But understand very specifically what their role is. And from a buyer, you're not getting unbiased advice from them. And from a seller, they're going to just help move the deal along, and they're going to allow you to keep running your business simultaneously or parallel to trying to get it sold.
Okay. No, definitely. That's something I think, like you mentioned, a lot of people forget about.
They forget about it. Yeah.
I help a lot of people with financing as well. And, you're like, okay, well, I'll just get my financing. And, usually it's at least 2 months.
Yeah, of course.
And it could easily be longer.
Easily.
The longest I've ever had was a year and a half.
Oh, I could believe it. And
You know,
that's why where people don't manage this process well, it's called a business buying process or a selling process for a reason. If you don't navigate well, if you don't know what the roadmap is, like from a buyer's perspective, and I'm staunch proponent of saying you need to have a roadmap, a blueprint for what to follow, because you have to be able to navigate your way successfully. Similarly for a seller, because if you don't know how to go through the various steps, then all these things, like how many times I've heard buyers wait for the financing, or they're trying to get a deal, then I'll go out and get my financing. No, the day you're supposed to start getting your financing is the day you start thinking about buying a business. Start to think about that. What is that going to look like? Do I have money to put into the deal? Can I think about seller finance? Do I have to go the route of an SBA loan? Friends, family, or otherwise. You have to start thinking about that. Now, you don't start thinking about like looking for the gas station when your car is like when the light goes on and you're on the highway in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, that's what it's like. And so paying attention to those details and being prepared really it's a fundamental difference for both sides of the equation, buyers and sellers. Going into this prepared makes a huge difference for what you're going to buy, completing the transaction, doing it successfully.
right. No, definitely preparation is key.
Key.
Knowing what to expect. But, even if everything goes perfect,
it never does.
and it never does.
It never does.
You're getting your SBA loan in a month and a half.
Yeah, if you're lucky and if you're working
if
with the right people, if you're
Right.
lucky and working with the right people, because everybody's covering the rear end, and you've got underwriters and processes that they themselves have to go through and validate the deal. And also keep one thing in mind: if a business gets listed for sale and the broker pre-qualifies it, they pre-qualify the business. They can't pre-qualify the buyer, of course, but they submit it to an SBA lender and they give them some general parameters. Here's what we can lend on the business. Now, the seller takes it out to market, or the broker, and there's 3 or 4 or 6 months go down the road, and then now they find a buyer. Well, they've got to submit a new set of documents, because the documents they submitted are already dated. They want to see something more recent. So in the ideal world, it's going to take you 60 plus days, 90, 60, 90 easily.
Right. And if there's no problems. And so definitely, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can check out some of Richard's stuff there as well. And, we've been talking a lot about buying a business. So now on the selling a business, everybody wants to sell their business, but, probably less than 5% of businesses ever sell. Why is that?
The numbers are, they generally use the term about 5 million business in the United States that are not just one owner operator, one individual who's doing everything. So it's got a couple of employees. They say the businesses sell every 5 years. So a lot of businesses sell. Many of them don't. The numbers on the public, the businesses that you find in a business for sale websites, about 75% of those don't sell. And there's some common things that I've seen repeatedly over the years that make a fundamental difference between people who have a business and it's sellable and people that have a business that's not sellable. The first thing is you've got to run your business like you have to sell it. That means you may not have it in mind that you want to sell it. It could be 5 years or 10 years or 25 years down the road. Run your business like you have to sell it. In other words, having flawless books and records. So think about if the IRS came in tomorrow and audited your books, would you pass? And pass flawlessly. You want to have flawless books and records, because one of the biggest reasons why deals fall apart is because the records are inaccurate. Not that they're stealing money, but they're just inaccurate records. Plus, it's going to also make you a better operator. So all these things that you want to run it, keeping in mind like you have to sell it. So that's point number one, and I always find that to be a really good bumper sticker. Second thing is, what keeps you up at night about the business? Whatever keeps you as the owner up at night about the business is obviously a problem within the business. But keep in mind, when someone is coming to look and evaluate your business and potentially buy it, any problem in your business is going to be multiplied to the power of 10 or larger in the eyes of the buyer. You're dealing with it. Maybe a customer concentration, maybe recruiting, training and retaining good employees. It may be replacing equipment in financially economic in an economic way. Whatever keeps you up at night in the business is going to be much worse in the eyes of a buyer. So you got to solve for that. And again, that's another thing. Point number 2, that's going to make it a better business today and down the road when the time comes to sell. And the third thing is, I like to ask sellers, what happens if you get hit by a Pepsi truck tomorrow? Will the business be able to operate? Do you have processes, procedures, and systems and people in place to be able to operate this business? I know, Andrew, you do a lot of work with business owners and leadership and what have you. And realistically, if you can't take anywhere, a month to 3 months to a year off from your business and not call the office, you haven't put the right processes and systems into place. Now, I know that may be very hard for some people to digest in a smaller business, but the smaller the business, think about the shorter the time away. So if you have a smaller operation, if you can't take a month off from the business without calling the office every day or 10 times a day, or the office calling you, you have not implemented the right processes, systems, or people in the business. So those are the 3 things. Again, run it like you have to sell it. What keeps you up at night? And think about it in the way, what happens if you get hit by a Pepsi truck? Put the processes, systems, procedures, people into place, solve the problems, and maintain flawless books and records. And that will not only make your business much better and grow it much quicker and at a better pace. And when the time comes to sell, you've already got those rock solid fundamentals into place, which is going to make it very attractive for a lot of buyers. And you're going to get all that money out plus more.
Okay, no, that's a great point. One thing I always say is, at the end of the day, no matter what type of business, no matter where you are, you need to run your business professionally.
Absolutely.
And that's if you're going to sell it, if you're not. And a lot of buyers, the best case situation is, you sell your business, but you don't need to work in it, like you had mentioned.
Absolutely. And it's what you want to strive for. Now, there's a lot of people who love working. I mean, I love working. I wouldn't like my business to be set up so that someone else runs it, but you want to be able to think about it from the eyes of a buyer, right? When you're running, not only when you put the right things into place, your business is not only better today, but when the world of buyers look at it, understand when you want to sell your business, put your buyer lens on. And what is someone going to look for? What are going to be problems for them? And understand it from that perspective. And when you when you adopt a philosophy like that, and it's, it's beyond empathetic, it's really seeing it through the lens of someone else, then you actually become, and you could do that objectively, you'll actually end up implementing initiatives in your business that's going to make your business better immediately.
Yeah.
Whether or not you sell it.
And because if you have money to buy a business, you're not really trying to buy a job. So
no, correct. You want to have an opportunity for growth. Absolutely.
So that's cool. But I guess the other thing I always say is, if you really learn how to run your business and grow it and move it forward, you can make more money even by not selling it in many cases.
I have a client right now. We were just talking about this recently, where one of the offers that came in was related to the number of years that they wanted him to stay on board and post-transaction. And he asked me what I think. And my opinion was, well, why would you sell it? You're better off to run it for that period of time and then sell it. Because if you're going to you enjoy it anyways. Yeah. That's the first thing, and it's very profitable. And there's other avenues for growth. But you've said if you want to sell it, you want to leave, expeditiously after a good transition, 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year. But you don't want to remain for 3 to 5. And so better off you like it, you enjoy it. It's throwing off lots of money. Run it for another 3. Let's keep beefing it up. Put a second in command, and then you'll be able to sell it then. In the meantime, you got 3 more years of profit that you put into your pocket.
Right. For a whole lot more.
For a whole lot more. Yeah. A whole lot more. Ideally.
But I guess on the other side is, you don't want to hold on your business so long that your financials start looking bad. So
Correct. You want to sell to the business when it's doing very well. I mean, that's a very good point. If you start to see that tide turn, then it's the best time to sell a business is when you think it's doing its best. Now, another buyer may come in and be able to do even better, but if you've reached a point where you've grown the business to a certain level and can't take it further, well, if you stay too long, it's like, I played a lot of ice hockey. It's just like the guy who overstayed his time, right? And they just can't keep up with the pace of the game, or the guy who stayed in the pros too long, right? Should have retired a couple of years ago. You've lost your vim and vigor, or energy, or whatever the case may be. You're just not the right person anymore to keep growing it.
Mhm.
And it takes a level of maturity to recognize that.
Definitely, and it's okay.
It's great. It's
It's
great.
kind of, so that's cool. Well, time always goes really fast.
Are we done? Wow, this
Unfortunately,
is
so
great.
we're pretty much knocking up on the hour. But always before I finish up, I always like to make sure that we, the guest leaves us with three key things to take away. A lot of times people can't really remember more than three things at a time.
like me.
So, we want people, definitely some things that, synthesize what we said, and that, people can start thinking about and utilizing even tomorrow, in moving their business forward. So I'll give you a minute to think about it. And what
A
I'll
lot of
do
pressure.
is, well,
No, we're good.
sure you can handle it. So
I'm good. I'm good.
okay. So I'll play a short 1 minute video, and then we'll come back with Richard, and go over those things. Most businesses are not growing, could be more profitable, and have cash flow issues due to lack of capital. What if you knew the secret to generating revenue, maximizing profitability, and acquiring capital when you need it? I'm Andrew Frazier, and I've developed a proven 5-step framework to take you from startup to scaling faster and easier. I laid it all out in the Masterpreneur Playbook. It's available now in both English and Spanish on Amazon, Audible, and my website, sbprouU.com. Get your copy today to start selling more and making more sooner. Back with Richard Parker. We've been talking small business. Anyone interested in buying or selling a business? We definitely talked about some valuable stuff, but all of this applies to any business because it's really about running your business better. So Richard, what should people take away from our conversation tonight?
Well, I had the 1 minute, so there's good pressure to think about what we've been talking about, and because we're talking about the buy side and the sell side, trying to put together a few things that really overlap between the two. And I think probably more pertaining to a buyer, but certainly from someone who's thinking about selling it, despite the stats of a number of businesses that don't sell. The one thing that I would really encourage, especially buyers, to do. People have this preconceived notion that buying businesses may be just for rich people or big companies or what have you, and the inclination is to potentially start a business. But I'm living proof, and tens of thousands of our clients are living proof that buying a business is very doable for the average person, for the average individual. And there's lots of ways to finance this, and a lot of way through seller financing. Most of our clients have 91% of our clients achieve seller financing, but most importantly, this is very doable. So if you have any inclination and even an ounce of entrepreneurial blood running through your veins, you really owe it to yourself to find out what's involved and to educate yourself and see if it's a path that you want to go down. The second thing would be, whether you're buying or selling a business, is don't forget what the end game here, because people have a tendency to get into the weeds and focus on the wrong things and get so immersed and oftentimes get emotional and draw lines in the sand or red flags or deal breakers or what have you. And they get way too far into the weeds and forget what the end game is. And so the way to deal with that is really have meaningful conversations and try to establish a good relationship with the other side, a buyer with a seller and a seller with a buyer, because you can get through everything if you have meaningful conversations and a good relationship, and you avoid digging yourself into these weeds and getting into scenarios that really don't make a whole lot of sense, and taking down a path that's just not going to result in a good outcome. And the last thing is, which clearly applies to both buyers and sellers, is be realistic about this whole transaction, whether it be about valuations or deal terms or what have you. You have to be realistic. You have to start breathing oxygen from this planet. Don't believe some of these stories that you hear about what businesses are sold for, or the terms and conditions, what some of these self-anointed gurus talking about buying, magnificent business, throwing off hundreds of thousands of dollars for no money down and closing the deal in a couple of weeks. I mean, that's all nonsense. It's just noise. But be realistic about what that's going to look like, and what you're ultimately trying to achieve here, and come to something. If come to agreement with both sides. Both sides have to come to agreements with the other side, in order to get a deal to the finish line, but maintaining that reasonableness and a level of fairness and being realistic throughout the process, I think applies to both buyers and sell side. So those are my three, and hopefully I did a reasonable job for you in the pressure cooked 1 minute that you want me to come up with that.
Okay, no, that's great. Definitely. I always tell people, never say no to yourself. So
amen to that. I agree.
Just because you're not rich doesn't mean you can't do that.
Absolutely correct. That's a great saying. Yeah.
So so definitely there, even when selling, a lot of times people will say no to themselves and not make their potential customers say no to them. So
correct.
As a business owner, that's a good practice. Looking at the end game, relationships are key.
They're everything.
And the owner knows more about the business than you. I would say one key thing, I bought a property from someone, and we had a misunderstanding about the expenses by like $1,000.
Right.
And Mama was like, just give it to him. So
That's
I was like, gave it to him.
That's right.
I bet you that $1,000 was worth 10.
Of course, and because it's because you've got to keep your eye on what you're trying to get to the end games, and you just stay out of the weeds. I mean, it's just when buyers and sellers establish a meaningful relationship with each other, buyer and seller trust and like each other, and the buyer wants to buy and the seller wants to sell, you can't stop them from getting a deal done.
Yep. So that's key, and then be realistic.
Yep.
This has been tremendous. So I appreciate you taking the time, sharing your expertise. Hang on for a minute. I'm going to close things out, but definitely appreciate that. Appreciate people's comments in the chat. You've got Richard's LinkedIn. You got his website. So if you want to reach out and learn more, you're welcome to do that. And let me just close things out, and then we'll get back. So, once again, great episode. Always appreciate people tuning in, your comments. Feel free to share this with your friends and other people that could benefit with it. And also, if you like it, feel free to subscribe and or for comments. So thanks again for Richard doing that. As you know, each week we've got a great topic and a great guest. What we're covering next week is idea generation and product development for growth with Raphael McGowan. Definitely, I always say that your most important job is sales and marketing. And that's why, the majority of our shows are on sales and marketing, because at the end of the day, if you don't sell anything, you don't make anything. So given how important that is, it's important to become as proficient as possible in sales and marketing. So looking forward to next week's show on that. And, really at the end of the day, the more that you know, the faster and more successfully your business is going to grow.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Live at 8:05, Talking Small Business. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Leadership Live is one of the many valuable resources provided through the Small Business Pro University, empowering business owners to learn, profit, and grow. Find out more at sbpro.u.com.